Welcome to Excel Tips. My name is Neale Blackwood, and in this episode we're going to look at how you can use Excel to improve the first 100 days in a new job. Starting a new job can be stressful and exciting. Hopefully some of these tips that I'll share with you today can reduce the stress a little bit and make you perform a little bit better in the job. One of the advantages with starting a new job is you have the ability to ask lots of questions, so that's a good thing. So make sure you do ask lots of questions and keep a note of the answers, especially when you're working with Excel files and if you're asking questions and getting and learning about how the Excel files work. Good idea to capture that in the Excel file itself. So we'll look at some examples of how you can do that as we go through. So just a warning, when you do take over Excel files from other people, sometimes you might not get much of a handover and the person who created the file may no longer be in the organization. So you might have to spend a little bit more time figuring out how the file works if that's the case. So just a heads up, that's fairly common that people leave the organization. They might be the Excel expert. And maybe that's what you are now. Maybe you're taking that over. So I'll show you some ideas and techniques to help you sort of track down where values come from and things like that. Probably start off with setting up the interface in Excel so that you can work more efficiently. The thing that makes it a lot easier is this little section here, which is called the Quick Access Toolbar. I'll just quickly go through it. So let's say I wanted to add this icon to the Quick Access Toolbar, which is centering. So if I right click that, add to Quick Access Toolbar, it pops up on the end here. And so now if I want to use that, I can just use it on the Quick Access Toolbar. Now the beauty of doing that is you can hide this section. So if you double click one of the tabs, that will hide it, and you can double click again to unhide it. If you're more a keyboard person, you can use Control and the F1 function key and press it again to show it. Just a heads up, if you're on a laptop, sometimes laptop keyboards require you to use another key to access the function key. So just a heads up on that. I do recommend using a full-size keyboard. If you are using a laptop, just plug it in and you'll find your productivity improves in Excel when you've got a full-size keyboard. The other part that can speed up your work is how you access files. So in the file section, you can use this open option. This can give you a list of files that you use a lot. It's called pinning. So if you wanted to pin a file, you can click on this little icon here and that pins the file to your list, and then you can unpin it as well to remove it from the list. You can do the same with folders, so you can pin a folder to the list. And that allows you to get to them fairly quickly. Something else you can do is when you do go into open and browse, so you can right click a folder, pin to quick access, and that will appear on the left hand side there. And that works in all of the open dialogues in Excel. So that can speed up accessing files and folders. Something that I suggest you use when you're starting out and even as you progress in your career as an accountant is using checklists. So checklists are a really easy tool. I use quite a number of different checklists. So here's one I use when I'm running a webinar. And now this one I actually print out and then I tick things off before I start the webinar. So you can create a separate checklist for separate things that you do. So for example, if I'm running on-site training, I have a list of things that I make sure I take along. And some of these can be manual, so you'll tick them off. Other ones you might just use an X in there. So I typically will put, when I'm using a checklist, I might use X to say I've done it. So if I've maybe started something but I haven't finished it yet, then I might use an S for started. And if you're waiting on something, you might use a W. You can use whatever makes sense to you, but I find this works quite well. Feel free to use checklists. Excel is a great tool for that because you can have a separate tab for each type of checklist that you create. Sometimes checklists are great when you're starting out, and then after a while you don't need them. Other times, like when I'm running webinars, I always print out my checklist and I always go through it. Let's close this one down. I won't save that. When you're opening an Excel file, you may find that some sheets are hidden, and the instructions sheet may be one of those. So hopefully when you're using files in Excel, they do have instruction sheets. If you right click on one of the tabs down the bottom, you can unhide, and instructions is there, so I can unhide that. So here are some instructions. So we'll actually work through these instructions. In the instruction sheet, it can be a good idea to include hyperlinks. So I've already got one here. So when I click on this, it takes me to the data sheet. To return, what you can do is press the F5 key, function key, and press enter, and that takes you back to where you were. Now, this validation sheet that I mentioned in this one doesn't have a hyperlink, so let's put one in. Control K, hold the control and press the K, and that opens up the hyperlink. You click place in this document, and validation is the tab that I want to link to. You can change the cell reference here, and that will update that. Click OK. So now we can click that. Just a heads up, if you change the sheet name, so I'm going to go make this validations, I'll put an S on the end. If I go back to my instructions and click on this, it won't work. Okay, so renaming a sheet will break any existing hyperlinks. So just a heads up on that. So if I go and fix it, then it will work. Okay, F5 and press enter. So there we go. So there's an example there. There we can create another one. Control K, this is for our input sheet. And then we need one for our index sheet. There we go. So they're hyperlinks. They allow you to navigate around the file really quickly. And as I mentioned, press F5 and then press enter, and that takes you back to where you were when you followed the hyperlink. Colors. Using colors can be pretty effective. One technique that I use is if I've got sheets that require input, so I've got one here that requires input. Colors are great to bring people's attention to certain things. In this case, I've used a yellow background for the input cells. So it's a good idea to have a consistent input cell color. I use a light yellow. I don't go for the bright yellow. I just use a light yellow. And I also use that for the sheets. So we can look at how you can use colors to identify sheets that require input as well. So this is one of the steps we're supposed to take. So if I put some values in here, and then there we go. What you can do is right click and maybe change the color. So I have changed that to green. So now I know that I've done that inputs. So that's one technique. Another, and then I'll use orange if I've started something but I haven't finished it. So you can use color on your sheet tabs to sort of show you the progress as you're going through. I've also used color here for reports. So the blue tabs are reports. The gray one here is the data. So you can use color coding to help organize and understand the structure of your sheet tabs. And again, just right click and you can use tab color here to choose the color that you want. So let's update this file. So what we need to do is drop in some data. So I've got that data prepared. I've prepared this earlier. So I'll copy this. To select a table, hold Control and press A, and then to copy, hold Control and press C. And then I'll go and paste it in the sheet data here. So I'm just going to paste that. So that's going to update the file. And what we need to do now is create another sheet. So according to our instructions, we need to copy the last month sheet and rename it, and we have to use a naming convention. So I'm going to copy the sheet. The easiest way to copy a sheet is to drag it across with the left mouse button, hold the control key, I'm still holding the mouse button down, hold the control key down and release the mouse. So that's made an exact copy of that. So what I'm going to do is rename that. So I'm going to do November 23. And there we go. The report automatically updates. This uses the sheet name to actually generate the report. So that's a reasonably advanced technique, which you can check out in this file. So it's using some formulas to extract the sheet name and then converting that to a date. So you can see we've got the validation working. It's saying OK. We've got a 0 here. What we're doing is checking this total against the total of that new data. If we go to our validation sheet, we can see we've got all zeros here. I've added a column for the validations, so it'll show a true if it's valid and false if it's not. So what I wanted to show you is how if you break it, what happens. Okay, now with validations, it's very common to have validations built into individual sheets. I recommend centralizing them though. So you might have the validation in a sheet, but you should also then centralize all of those validations into a single sheet. That way it's a lot easier to find out if you do have a problem and also to see where that problem is. Let's break this one. So I'm going to delete the cell that we're validating. So when I delete that, it automatically causes an error. So you can see it comes up here as an error. And if I go to my validation sheet here, we can spot where that error is. So having a centralized validation sheet allows you to see where the validation problem is. You don't have to go and look in each individual sheet. I've also got an overall validation. Now this particular cell is linked. I've linked to it in all of these other sheets. If you want to follow a link in Excel, there's a keyboard shortcut you can use. So if you want to follow that L1 formula back to the validation sheet, you hold the control key down and press the left square bracket. And that takes you to that link. And then you can use that F5 and enter shortcut to go back again. So just like the hyperlink. So control and the left square bracket will follow a link, which is handy if you're trying to find out where values are coming from. I do recommend if you're using a file and you're making the same input multiple times, rather than doing that, it's a lot better to say centralize your inputs, which I've entered here, and that way you have one place to go to make your inputs and then you can link to them in the other sheets. Also, you should only enter something once. So you shouldn't be entering the same thing multiple times. Just enter it once and then link to it. I thought I'd show you a little trick here when you're working with charts too. So I've added the extra month data in here, which I did earlier, but you'll notice the chart hasn't updated. Now, when you click on the chart, you may notice this highlighting here. You can actually use this to update the chart. So if you get this double-headed arrow, click and hold and drag across, it'll update the chart for you. So now it's including November's data as well. So just a little easy trick to update and expand a chart. I do recommend including an index sheet. I'll show you a little trick you can do here with the hyperlink. The other hyperlinks we had the name of the sheet plus the cell reference. If you just want the name of the sheet, you can actually just put that in. So if we go here and Control K, what we can do is, this is the text to display. So we want November 23, and maybe you want to put a dash in there. And then we can go down here, select November and click OK. And that will put a different name in there for the hyperlink. It still works. And you can come back and F5 enter, remember. Again, it's just a different way to insert a hyperlink. When I mentioned earlier about asking questions and getting the responses, I thought I'd show you just a couple of ways to capture those responses. Obviously, you can just type them in a cell. So in the instructions, you could add some extra comments to help you understand what you're doing. Another way is to use what's called a note. So there's an example of notes in the file here. So in cell A1 of the monthly sheets, there's an explanation of what the formula in cell A1 does, and that's a note. So what you can do is you can right click a cell and you can put new note, and then you can type in whatever you want, and that note will pop up it's like a post-it note, and you can explain what the cell is for. Adds up the total sales. And then when you point to that with the mouse, that note pops up. There is another technique called comments. So if you right click a cell and go new comment, this one here is more a threaded comment. So this one's, if you're working on a file with someone, this one's really useful. It builds up the comments one after the other based on what you enter. So that one there is a little bit more for collaboration rather than putting notes in, but that can also be useful too if you're developing something. So that's the other technique. So that they can be useful for capturing the responses when you're asking questions about what the file is for or how the file is used or where the data comes from, those sort of things. Okay, so there's some ideas on how you can improve working in Excel, and hopefully that can help you with your first 100 days in a new job. So even if you haven't started a new job, you can use some of these techniques to improve your files. Centralizing validations, adding an index sheet, and just having one sheet that you input can really improve your efficiency in Excel. I hope you found that useful. Thanks for watching.